Thanks very much, Greg. When the word first came out that we were going to do a strategic Landpower symposium, I went to my friend Greg Cantwell, who had the rose pinned on him on this, and said, if we do not address the Homeland in this and every other forum that you have from this time forward, then we are missing the boat. And I think you got a great depiction of that in our keynote speaker this morning. One of the things that should be very, very clear to all of us right now is everything that we do as soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, everything that we do is exponentially more complicated when you do it within the territorial confines of the United States because you're doing it among Americans. And what our last speaker pointed out, the very thing that makes us who we are and the freedoms that we enjoy make operations difficult for us, and we, by the way, would have it no other way. Because I would remind you all that from the first day that you pinned on your ranks until where you currently stand, we swore to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. So we are absolutely delighted to be with you all today to look into some certain aspects of the challenge that we're finding with Homeland Defense and the operation of the United States military within the territorial confines. I am blessed in that I'm going to step out on that. I was about to say 2 out of 3 of the panelists today are friends. I'd like to say 4. We'll get at 3 out of 4. But it is just such a pleasure to have these folks with us. Phil Brown and I have become friends. Phil did, in fact, come very recently from Alaska, but he is assigned to the United States Northern Command. He's with the J7 there right now, and he is the director of the, what's the new definition that you have, Phil? Training and Exercise Directorate, putting together things for the leadership team, developing future concepts, a portfolio for the commanders and how they're going forward. But beyond that, too, he is a senior fellow on the newly instituted Homeland Defense Institute, a think tank that Northcom specifically stood up, Northcom Norad, I have to remind myself of that all the time, specifically stood up to get into the deeper look at some of the issues that we're going to be talking about. It resides at the United States Air Force Academy. For most of the people in the room, I would say that is akin to what we did at West Point with the Modern War Institute, but they are stepping out smartly with regard to the issues that we're talking about here. Phil has an incredible background. His portfolio at the Defense Institute is the things that almost immediately come to mind with us: the Pan-Arctic Policy and Strategy, National Resilience, Deterrence, Homeland Defense Design, which I think it gets us into the next level of scrutiny that we need to be taking in these matters, and matters to solidify the relationships that we have with our allies and our partners, because one of the things that my students have been beaten about the head with is that Homeland Security is not a governmental function, and it is also not something that just resides within the United States. If the time comes where we are looking at the actual execution by our adversaries against our people, then you better know that our partners, most immediately Canada and Mexico and the Bahamas, but beyond that, we would be looking to them, and rightfully so, for the type of support that they would be looking to us in any given warfare situation. After Phil, we've got Dr. John Borek, who has been a blessing to me this past year as working as a postdoctoral fellow in the Homeland Defense and Security Issues Group at CSL and here at the Army War College. John is a former Army officer himself. He is from the intelligence community. He was, the last one of his last assignments was serving as the branch chief at NGIC, the National Ground Intelligence Center, where he was awarded the Hardin Award for Analytic Excellence 4 different times. And for intel people, that really means something. For Marine helicopter pilots, it probably looks well. But that just shows the background that John brings to this, and it's been a blessing to have him with us. He's going to, in addition to doing things with us, he's also an adjunct professor at the University of New Hampshire, working with them in their National Security Intelligence Program. And then last but certainly not least, we have General Hoover here with us. And the beauty of having General Hoover here is that he's going, in his talk, he's going to try and put an operational face on some of the concepts that Phil and John will be talking about in their presentation. At this point, you all know I'm also, sir, not going to read everything in your bio, but the things that are important to us, the multiple aspects of General Hoover's career, which apply directly to what we're talking about here. When they talked about him being the former deputy commander of Northcom, if you looked in that, it said there very specifically anticipating and preparing for and responding to threats in the AOR. And moreover, that providing oversight for the commander's DISCA mission. And that's the two big things, right? There are three big things with Northcom, we all know this. Homeland Defense, Defense Support of Civil Authority, and Theater Security Cooperation. But when it comes down to application, he had the rose pinned on him from both sides of the issue. In addition to that, some of his other background, which really recommends him to this discussion, I think today as we're getting into greater complexities, is the fact that he was a CG of the Joint Sustainment Command in Afghanistan. And those types of issues that we really aren't thinking too much about with regards to things that could happen within the territorial confines, we need to get on our frontal lobes. He was FEMA's chief of staff in the very frictionless time of FEMA being incorporated into the Department of Homeland Security, smiling all the way, of course. That showed that is, at that time, I would suggest to you that was the principal partnership within the federal government with the United States military on things that we would be needing to do for our people in times of crisis. And the other thing that I would recommend from his biography to you is a part that he played working as the Assistant Vice President for CSX Corporation for Police and Infrastructure Protection. Because what that gets to is the sort of thing that General Evans reminded us, the quintessential importance of the private sector in folding into not only the discussions but execution, but probably into the discussions of the development of our strategy and our plans along the way.
Let me start off with the standard disclaimer. What I'm about to talk about in the presentation reflects only the opinions of the authors, not the Department of Defense, United States Air Force Academy, or any other part of Northcom. My comments afterwards, should there be any questions, will be my opinions only. And not that I don't trust Zoom for non-attribution, but I'm going to try to be as good as I can. I love the comment that was yesterday, I will tell you the truth, but I may weight the truth to my advantage. That's one of my new favorite quotes from that perspective. So, you know, not many people get a 3-star to set up your presentation. I have to tell you that I met General Evans for the very first time last night across the table at dinner. Found out from his bio that we flew attack type of aircraft. I'm an A-10 driver by trade, so I tell you that because now I can be heinous and tell you you're not doing your job because you're still going to love me at the end. And he flew attack helicopters across the field when I was putting the Hope and Pope, and he was flying across the way in Bragg in the 82nd. So it's a pleasure to be here. I wish I had met him earlier, but it seems it didn't matter because his cartoon kind of described the things I'm going to talk to you about. I have 4 main points that I want to make sure that you have in your brain bites before we go. 1, the Homeland is not, underscore twice, not a sanctuary. Period, dot, end of sentence. We are in a contested environment. If you think we are not, please check in your badge, go home, and figure out how to get back into this discussion. Third, I'd like you to consider that this Homeland should be under the auspices of our thought process as a theater of war, not just, quote, end quote, the Homeland. It should be ascribed to as a theater of war. And as a result, that gentleman right there and the things he has to do to set the theater are different. What he does with the 168th, I hope I'm not dyslexic on that, I can never remember if it's 168th or 186 that does the setting of the theater, is a different way of doing it than when you're in any of the stands or any place else that those people who would do us harm. So I'd like you to think about that as I talk. I would also, we didn't steal, I did not see his presentation. I didn't hear anything until we had barbecue last night, but we're going to talk about power projection. An answer to my own question is, you bet your sweet patootie that they will. Slide, please. So we set it up as a puzzle. You can read the paper or not, but we set up a stage with a little bit of a prelude. Fundamentally, at Homeland Defense Institute, we were formed because we think that America doesn't think Homeland Defense is a thing, and we would offer that it is. We have to take care of it. We think, most Americans think, that power projection is a piece of cake. We've always done it. We got those big moats that we got to get across somehow, either float or fly, and then it's not a big deal, easy peasy. But we offer to you that what if it isn't? So these are going to be charges to the sponsors as I go through here today. I'm going to make charges to the War College and each of the parts of the G3, 5, and 7. I'm a recovering J5 myself, so I'm going to talk to you from that perspective. I'd offer you that if you're watching what's happening in Ukraine, power projection is tough. As a A-10 pilot, 41 miles of tanks parked in a row was somewhat of a salivation contest. And to how the hell can I get over there? I didn't even care if it was an A-10 ski. I would have gone over there and had a good time. So I offer you to think about that. So slide, please. We set it up in our prelude. We put together a fictional story, which I think you could probably use for a tabletop exercise in an academic environment. But we picked a gent named Randy, very similar to every one of the insider threat scenarios you've ever thought about. Randy works for a construction company. Randy's company just got a really cool contract to map the entirety of an infrastructure of their city and their region. Randy's got a gambling problem, a really bad one. The people who are fronting him happen to be from Beijing or tied to Beijing. Now, let me quickly say this is not xenophobic. That's who our pacing adversary is. Randy is just another Joe Bag of Donuts, Joe Sixpack, as Bert likes to talk about. So they've named this Operation Dondang, which is, we just picked that out of the air. So I told you about what Randy's going to do, and it just so happens that Randy knows, based on a previous exercise that candidly irritated all of the American citizenry, because there are all these tanks and all these roadblocks and they couldn't get to Starbucks, knows that where the lines are, and it happens to be between a fort and a port. So that's the setup that we have in our prelude. We didn't copyright any of this, so please feel free to use our scenario as and when you like. I think Jason and Greg are planning on putting this in some type of publication. Slide, please. So, got to have a problem statement. I will tell you, in HDI, we don't look in the world of requirements, we look in the world of problems. We look at what people can address rather than telling them that we need a left-handed screwdriver to get after it. We many times don't know what the hell we need, but we know what we have to get after. So we take a look at what the problem statement is. And being at the War College, you either read the slide or you let people read the slide, so I'm letting you read the slide. And Bert's lips have stopped moving, so I know I can move on. Next slide, please. Well, Bert and I have known each other for a while. So started out in a little Bavarian Gasthaus pub, which is a fun story. So let me tell you a little bit about real life. So I want you to go back, harken back to the time when you were looking at the cartoon that the general had up there. Fort Carson, which is in my hometown, 6 days, 24/7, without anybody bothering them to get 2,000 pieces of equipment. That is and this is a word, I looked it up in the Urban Dictionary, it's a mathematical term, a shit ton of stuff onto rail yards. 6 days. Without any interruption. Did I mention that? So we think this should give you pause. If you are a policy person, if you're a 5, if you're in operations, or if you're in a training and exercise business, this should bother you a lot. Next slide, please. So here's our fictional scenario and what we think they're going to do. So Randy's going to go out and he's going to map everything. He is going to not irritate the people of the citizenry of the town. He's going to have his white van with his construction company's name on the side at an intersection with cones, placing really cool little camera devices on microwave towers that look like trees, because we don't want to see microwave towers anymore. And he is going to figure out where the sewers go, so in case they want to run Les Miserables type of scenario, they know where to go. They're going to map via geoprint of everybody's phones where the toing and froing are. And they're going to figure out where the chokeable points, that's the word we used versus choke points, chokeable points, and that way you can show that it's an accident, because we know we're all irritated when there's accidents, but they know they happen. Going to find out where the EMTs go and flow and figure out how to get them there in near simultaneous action so they can block the exit from the most popular of the housing areas in the town to the gate. They're going to find out where the janitor is, who has the only key to the gate, so that when everybody shows up, they just have to make sure that the janitor was told, as the general pointed out, that his bank account had been emptied that morning, and now he's concentrating on that rather than getting it. We looked at trying to figure out how to get the train drivers distracted, but damn it, the Army has an MOS for train drivers. I didn't know that. So we couldn't get in their chili. But there are other things. I'll give you a real-life example. We shut down I-25, which is the main artery between Colorado Springs and Denver, for 3.5 hours, complete stop parking lot, because of 2 cigarettes being thrown out the window and causing grass fires. 2 cigarettes. Shut down the major area. So the 2 rules are, as the general also alluded to, make it look like an accident. That way it's not attributable. And we're nose down, listening to whatever radio we want, trying not to spill our Starbucks or whatever coffee that you have, and irritated that you can't get there that day, so you're not looking at the white vans that are out there, trying to figure out how I get around this 2-cigarette fire and who the idiot from California was driving through Colorado that started it. And we want to figure out the second thing as an adversary, because I'm looking at this through the adversary's eyes: never, ever, ever, ever kill an American. It will piss us off. We will hunt you down. We don't care how much of our treasure we use. We will get you as long as it takes, anywhere we have to go to do it. So Randy has to make sure that his plans and his handlers look like an accident and nobody gets killed. Maybe wing them a little bit, because that way the EMT may have to come in, but you have to do that. Again, influence people's thoughts. Americans are amnesic and apathetic, in my opinion. If you ask them what apathy means, they usually tell, I don't remember and I don't know and I don't care anyway. So you want to make them figure out how that's going to do it. Randy wants to figure out an action plan so that his handlers can know how to do it. I argue foreign actors are here today. The individual trying to get to Popeyes is here today. They have assets that are incredible and available to them today. We need to get after it. Next slide, please. So what? We got to figure out what these warfare issues are that our pacing threat and our today threat are involved with. They're doing small things to change the perspective. If we can change the mind a little bit, Americans become numb, and then they accept a new reality, kind of like your neighbor putting a fence into your yard 1 inch a year. Pretty soon he owns your yard, and we don't look about it. We have to deal with traditional and non-traditional, misinformation, disinformation. And again, I didn't steal a script. I did this before, but the good news is I'm in sync with the 3-star who happens to be in there. We actually sent researchers to Ukraine. Bert was part of a team that went to Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania to look at, this was in August and September, how Russia is using laboratories to affect homeland defense issues. Everything is being weaponized, was our finding, and everything was being weaponized, from information to religion, to which bodega you can go to. And they will go after all areas to try to get rid of us. Next slide. So I'm going to go to the charge. I would charge and I'll let you read the other stuff. I charge the Army War College to get some thinking going about how the adversary is going to do this. I think we don't have enough thought in this area. I would charge the Headquarters 5 to giddy up on policy and strategy to take a look at forts to ports and what force projection means, while simultaneously taking care of the theater of war. We have to do both. It's not an either-or perspective. I would charge the headquarters for the Department of the Army 3 to create an adversary force. We did it for National Training Center. We did it in the Air Force at Red Flag. I would charge you to start a new force structure that gets after adversaries that think like who does what to whom. And I would encourage it to be a whole of nation. We need the public sector, the private sector involved in that, and we need it today. And lastly, the 7, to train and exercise against this. We get better when we exercise. We exercise and train better than any mother, son, or daughter on the planet, so let's get after it. The rest is, I argue, sir, that we can do things other than sinking them. We can screw them up. We can mess with their GPS. We can spoof them. We can get them to the wrong place. We can turn motors off. So anything that the adversary can do, they will do. If it delays and they can sue for their objective, they win. If we can't get this giant machine forward, I argue the Army could be moot in the fight. Don't do that.
Thanks. I just want to start off by reiterating when Bert introduced me is that I'm an intelligence analyst by trade. That's my background. Former Army FA-34, and then over 10 years as a civilian analyst. So my perspective on Homeland Defense, Homeland Security is not as a practitioner, but it's more threat-based. I'm looking at it more from the outside in, and I think that'll come across in my presentation. I've got 3 main points that I want to make today. I hope to expand on and leave you with. The first is that our current strategy and approach to Homeland Defense is outdated. It does not reflect current threat, and the foundation of it is still rooted in the middle of the 20th century. Second point, as the lead federal agency for Homeland Defense, it is the responsibility of DoD to begin the work necessary to develop a viable Homeland Defense strategy. And third, the adoption of integrated deterrence and all-domain operations provides the framework needed for that reimagining of Homeland Defense. So let me expand on those 3 points. There have been 2 published DoD strategies for Homeland Defense and defense support of civil authorities since the end of the Cold War. The first one in 2005, and our current one was put out in 2013. As you read the 2005 version, you'll see the transition in thinking from a Homeland Defense construct that was rooted in nuclear deterrence and the ability to project power overseas to a post-9/11 counter-terrorist approach. Right? The phrase used was active layered defense. And also in 2005, the DSCA, Defense Support of Civil Authorities mission, was placed almost entirely in the construct of support to civil authorities in counterterrorism fight, and then recovery after an attack. Now, when you look at the 2013 version, you'll see that 9/11 was more than a decade in the rearview mirror, and Hurricanes Katrina and Sandy and an H1N1 outbreak were all much more recent, among other emergencies that happened at that time. You also had PPD-8, which came out in March 2011, and while that was directed primarily at the Department of Homeland Security and FEMA, it directed the entire executive branch to focus on planning and managing national emergencies. So then it's not surprising that the 2013 strategy for Homeland Defense, our current strategy, the one we're operating under now, shifted the emphasis to DSCA and post hoc response efforts. Countering air and maritime strategic threats, nuclear attack, was the only dedicated Homeland Defense objective. And 3 of the 4 identified strategic approaches necessary to achieve success were DSCA-oriented, and the 4th focused on DoD continuity of operations. So I say all that, it's not meant as a dig or as somehow as a failing of the Defense Department. It reflected the priorities of the nation at the time and the threats that we faced. But that's my point. The nation's approach to Homeland Defense has had to evolve over time as the threat has changed, as the territorial construct, the definition of what constitutes the Homeland has changed. And things have changed again and dramatically since 2013. And I'll also add that the 2013 Homeland Defense strategy gave itself a shelf life of 2020. So we're already 2 years past its own forecasted relevance. So now I'm going to transition a little bit and talk about the threat. And what I'm going to say does not diminish the threat to the nation from strategic nuclear weapons, whether it's a Russian ICBM or a Chinese hypersonic missile. But while those may be the most dangerous threats to the homeland, they are not the most likely weapons to be used. As an intel analyst, one of the efforts I worked on, and this was a few years back before the current operations in Ukraine, was to look at Russia's campaigns in Georgia and Ukraine and some other places and their evolving doctrine and develop some scenarios for how that would be applied in the Baltic states. And I think that's where I gained an appreciation for what I'll call gray zone warfare here, alternatively hybrid or asymmetric warfare. For this panel, let's just say that it's below the threshold of open conflict, doesn't directly challenge U.S. military superiority or trigger mutual defense treaties, are non-attributable or deniable, limited in scope and duration, and more often than not, target civilian infrastructure, morale, public and private institutions, and the economy. So gray zone warfare does not seek victory through shock and awe, swift campaigns, but instead is a tool of coercive gradualism. It erodes resistance to an adversary's actions, and if and when we choose to respond to those actions, it limits our options. And it weakens support relationships both internally and externally with our partners. And gray zone warfare isn't new. We've been talking about it and writing about it for years now. It's well documented in places like Estonia and Georgia, South China Sea. NATO stood up in 2018 counter-hybrid support teams. Gray zone warfare is not only the most likely threat to the U.S., it is a current and ongoing threat to the homeland. For whatever reason, cultural, political, bureaucratic, we either don't see or don't want to admit that the nation is currently under attack. We parse state-sanctioned, if not outright state-conducted adversarial actions as individual criminal acts, instead of seeing their strategic intent or how they come together. For example, most people frame their opinion on election interference through a partisan lens, instead of the intelligence community's findings that it's part of a long-standing desire to undermine the U.S.-led liberal democratic order with the goal of undermining faith in the U.S. democratic process. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping, Ibrahim Raisi, they aren't Democratic or Republican. They're Russian and Chinese and Iranian, and they don't wish us well, regardless of your political party. As an intel guy, it's frustrating to me when I read in the National Defense Strategy that the homeland is no longer a sanctuary, or the Chief of Staff's paper that the homeland will be contested. TRADOC G2's description of the operating environment through 2030 that our adversaries have determined the best way to defeat the United States is to win without fighting. So all this is an acknowledgement that the current strategy for homeland defense isn't working, is outdated, and doesn't reflect the current threat. When you see the different planning scenarios, whether it's think tank papers or whatever, a crisis erupts overseas somewhere and homeland comes under attack, whether it's hypersonic missiles or computer network attacks to disrupt mobilization and deployment. But you need to think red, put your intel analyst hat on, and recognize that by the time the missiles take out the shipping terminals, or the power goes out and the gas stops flowing through the pipeline, that's not the start of the adversary's attack. That's the culmination of it. From a DoD perspective, it's analogous to saying that phase 3 of an op plan is the start of the fight. That might be where you maneuver to dominate the battle space, but it isn't the start of it. So hopefully I've made the case that our current strategy for homeland defense is outdated and does not reflect our current threat. So let's move on. What can we do about it? So as the lead federal agency for Homeland Defense, it is the responsibility of DoD to begin the work necessary for a realistic Homeland Defense strategy. So you'll hear in every speech, read in every white paper or intel estimate that our adversaries have been studying our way of war since 1991, and they know they can't beat us force on force. They don't want to try, hence gray zone warfare. So it's one thing to say that, but it's another to understand what that means and then take the next steps to fix it. And we talked about this earlier today, a couple times. Our nation, the way we do business has seams. And whether that's bureaucratic or constitutionally driven, it doesn't matter. And for this panel in Homeland Defense, we have great big seams and responsibilities. We have Homeland Defense, which is the responsibility of the Defense Department. We have Homeland Security, which is the responsibility of the Department of Homeland Security, except for that portion of Homeland Security that's the responsibility of the Department of Justice and the FBI. We have a Director of National Intelligence, which does everything but national intelligence. It won't touch it, and is in fact focused on foreign intelligence. And then we have the seams between federal government and states and territories, the territories and the state and local government, the states and local governments. And then remember that the majority of our infrastructure, 85 to 90%, is in the private sector. So like my previous comments on Homeland Defense strategies, my point isn't that the way we do business is bad. It isn't. Inefficiency and redundancy is built into our government to protect our liberty. We don't want any one branch of government or arm of government to become too powerful to not have a counterweight to it. And that actually works out well for us. An efficient government can be a dangerous government. But again, our adversaries have studied how we do business. And those seams are our weakness. And gray zone activities are designed to split those seams of responsibility and not cross the threshold of response. So how do we defend against an enemy that has studied and understands our strengths and weaknesses better than most Americans do, all while maintaining our liberty and values and constitutional mandates? So we have to have one underlying Homeland Defense strategy that is more than a DoD effort. It has to be a whole-of-government approach. It has to include Department of Homeland Security and Department of Justice and likely all the other cabinet departments. We have to stitch those seams of responsibility back together and develop a common understanding of what we're all doing and how it all fits together, and somehow, while maintaining our constitutional liberties, develop a common intelligence-based situational awareness of the threat. It's a big nut to crack, but DoD is the lead federal agency for Homeland Defense. And when you have a lead agency, the implication is that you have supporting agencies. And as I learned a long time ago, when you're in charge, you need to take charge. So the conversations and staff actions need to start. And of course, it will take executive level support from the President and the NSC to generate action from agencies that are already busy doing what they normally do anyway. But really, this is DoD's President Kennedy's moonshot moment here. We're not doing this because it's easy. We're doing it because it's hard, and it has to be done. No other agency is going to take the lead on it, and no other agency is better equipped to take the lead on it. And that leads me to my next point, which is the adoption of integrated deterrence and all-domain operations provides exactly the framework needed for that reimagining of Homeland Defense. So it's hard to imagine a whole-of-government approach under a DoD lead for Homeland Defense that addresses the gray zone fight, right? Unless you read the emerging concepts of integrated deterrence and all-domain operations. While I'm not on the inside for either of these two concepts, I read everything I could find publicly available, and I took a lot of notes yesterday. And it's clear to me that integrated deterrence and all-domain operations provides the framework needed to get everyone on board and marching in the same direction. So we think about strategy as ends, ways, means, and risks. Integrated deterrence is the ways element of a Homeland Defense strategy, where the military element of deterrence is integrated with the other elements of government as well as the capabilities of allies and partners. It envisions using all of the nation and allied capabilities in a more networked manner, and to also take a more global perspective. So if deterrence is a combination of denial and punishment, that punishment piece does not have to be directly tied to the flashpoint itself. And as all domain operations is the greater integration of air, land, space, cyber, electromagnetic information, all those means of war, then we have the complement to the integrated deterrence ways. Most of what I've seen on integrated deterrence is based around the China-Taiwan scenario, which is a great scenario to develop the concept on. And I have seen a presentation by General Van Herk where he did talk about integrated deterrence in the homeland, but even then it was about defending the homeland from that phase 3 type culminating attack, not identifying the applicability of it to gray zone warfare. This tightly integrated whole of government approach appears to be tailor-made to gray zone conflict. So I'm going to quickly review my 3 main points and then offer some closing thoughts. Our Homeland Defense strategy is dangerously outdated. It doesn't reflect current threat intentions and capabilities. In order to develop a strategy that works in the gray zone and across all levels of conflict, it's going to take a whole of government approach that DoD must lead, must take the initiative on, and build support for across all of government. And integrated deterrence and all domain operations provides that framework for that work to begin. So some closing thoughts I want to squeeze in. First, the nation can't wait for DoD to complete this whole of government approach to Homeland Defense. As I said earlier, our current strategy is already 2 years over its forecasted relevance. A DoD-specific interim strategy to defend the homeland should be developed, and that could be the basis for any whole of government approach that comes later. And we either need a standalone gray zone-specific defense strategy or annex to the primary one. Second, I talked about all domain operations being the way to integrate the means of warfare. All the services need to prioritize the development of additional means to deter, and again, that's deny and punish an adversary in the gray zone. The Army's Big Six, for example, are not gray zone applicable, and I've looked at all the services, their priorities for the upcoming fiscal years, and there isn't anything in there that's gray zone applicable that gives the President and the NSC options to operate in the gray zone. And third, DIA specifically, maybe the larger intel community, must establish a baseline understanding of the gray zone threat to the homeland to guide that planning and capability development. We have to have the foundational understanding of threat capabilities and intentions. So after the Cold War and during the 90s, as a nation, we knew about Al-Qaeda and the threat of terrorism. We had been attacked by Al-Qaeda before. The first World Trade Center bombing, the embassies in Africa, the coal. They published a declaration of war against us in 1996. But we couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge the depths of the implications. We're in an analogous situation today. We see what our adversaries are doing. We understand their strategy, their intentions, but we're dancing around the edges of taking the steps needed to respond. Yesterday, we talked about the 2022 National Defense Strategy. The #1 priority for the DoD was protect the homeland. Well, that was the #1 priority in 2018 and the ones before that, and I don't see where that's been translated into a viable strategy for Homeland Defense. Specifically concerning Homeland Defense, we can't keep doing what's always been done, what we're comfortable doing, just trying to do it faster or more networked. We have to adapt to the threat that we face.
I think what I'd like to do today is really just operationalize what General Evans talked about. He covered the threats, he covered the challenges of being the land component commander in the homeland. And, you know, I've been involved in Homeland Defense and Homeland Security. You know, I was a plank owner of the Department of Homeland Security and, you know, served in the White House on the Homeland Security Council and lived through Katrina. I was in the White House for Katrina. I was part of the team that provided Title X support for Superstorm Sandy. I was there for the shuttle disaster. You know, so I've got a lot of T-shirts along the way, and then certainly sitting as the deputy commander at Northcom, you know, for a little over 2 years, I think has given me an opportunity to really see and understand the challenges of operating in the homeland. And so, as I say, what I'd like to do is just kind of operationalize that for you and then put it in context and think of, you know, the things that we just talked about, you know, operating, you know, attacks in the gray zone and how that impacts our ability to operate it and project power. Certainly, I think, you know, our center of gravity is, as we've talked about yesterday and today, is our ability to power project. And to the extent that the adversaries are, you know, can shut us down, you know, that impacts our ability to act decisively globally around the world. I think General Evans pointed that out really well. So imagine a day, there are 2 hurricanes have already hit the coast. There's another hurricanes that are forecasted to impact the homeland and areas. The city of Houston is flooded. Parts of southern Louisiana are flooded. Florida has been hit. Key West is knocked out. The entire state of Florida has been impacted. Jacksonville is flooded. And there's more hurricanes coming. You're responding to all of that. And while that's going on, there are wildfires in California, Oregon, and Washington State. And the Department of Interior, not FEMA, the Department of Interior has asked for Title X support to help fight those wildfires. Why is that? We'll talk about that. 2 major earthquakes have just happened in Mexico. Devastating earthquakes in Mexico. While all of that is going on, there is what we call a 1200 squawker. A Cessna flying into the Special Flight Rules area of DC, and so those of you who don't know, the CIFRA area, the Special Flight Rules area of DC, is a 30-mile ring around the city. And an Operation Noble Eagle call is being called. We've already scrambled F-16s from Andrews, and the Coast Guard Blackjack helicopters have flown out of National Airport to intercept. We also have a ring of ground-based defense capabilities that's in and around the DC area as well as part of that Noble Eagle response. And while all of that is going on, the N2C2, NORAD Northcom Command Center, is calling you because KJU just launched an ICBM that is overflying Japan, and it is a nuclear-capable missile. That's a day in the life of Northcom. and a day in the life of NORAD. And so when we think about the complexities of operating in the homeland, those are things, and I will say, all of those events are things that we're going to look to General Evans to have to respond to. That was what was happening in 2017. We had 22 missile launches from North Korea. The last 2 were overflights of Japan. Significant activities by KJU at the time. There's not been a command before, there's not been a command since that has experienced 22 ICBM missile launches from North Korea, as we did in the 2017 hurricane season. 5 hurricanes that basically, as you know, leveled Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, the Caribbean, so our partners operating out of Southcom were also engaged in that. We did humanitarian assistance to Mexico. We flew relief supplies down into Mexico to help our Mexican partners recover from 2 devastating earthquakes. The Noble Eagle mission happens on a daily basis. That's part of our bread and butter. I mean, as General Evans pointed out, we have battle drills on battle drills for doing Noble Eagle calls to make a decision as to whether or not we are going to shoot down a civilian aircraft. And it's not just the 1,200 squawkers, it's commercial airliners as well. And then we have our Homeland Defense, our ground-based missile interceptors as part of our mission set. And so I just want to put that into kind of context of what's going on, as a day in the life at NORAD and Northcom, and the things, again, that we look to General Evans and his team and the forces that we assign to him as our land component commander to operate in the homeland. Next slide. So any good headquarters guy has always got a mission statement. This is the Northcom and NORAD mission statement. And what I really want to point out here is General Van Herk has 4 priorities to execute his mission sets there. It is all domain awareness, so we've talked about that, and that's a priority area of investment for him. It is gaining information dominance, another priority area of investment for NORAD and Northcom. But the 2 that I think General Evans talked about are really critical, and that is decision superiority. That is being able to see the adversary further afield and further away from our shores so that we can actually do something. When we talk about, and it was really General Shaughnessy who kind of coined that phrase of the homeland is no longer a sanctuary, and part of what drove that was the realization that Russia can stay in Russian sovereign territory and hold critical infrastructure targets in the homeland at risk. And as advanced cruise missiles and hyperglide and missile sets come into play, we have to have a way to deal with that. And I think General Evans pointed out some of our issues with that. And General Van Herk has now taken that a step further to say, decision superiority, increasing decision space in order to make those decisions to deter competition, to de-escalate in crisis and defeat in conflict is a priority of his, and you'll hear him quite frequently talk about that. And then finally, global integration. And we've talked about that yesterday, about global planning. General Evans mentioned, his plans at our North are globally integrated. And so, that I think is where the command is focused and where the command is trying to drive investments to be able to operate and defend in the homeland so that our forces around the globe are able to operate and we can fight the away game before it actually gets to the home field here. Next slide. This, I think, is the crux of what General Evans was getting at in his conversation this morning, and that is, under what authority are you operating? It's nice to say, well, DOD is the lead federal agency for Homeland Defense, or, we need a whole of government effort to do this, or, why doesn't just DOD do it? But the reality is we've got this thing called the Constitution and federalism. And we just don't do that. And it is a long-standing it is a long-standing accepted practice of of how we do these things in the Homeland, and whether you call it Homeland Defense or Homeland Security or call it DISCA, whatever it might be, you have to understand as a commander, and especially as a land component commander, and General Evans, this is like in his hip pocket of things that he has to understand when somebody asks you to go do something in the Homeland. And the first question is, okay, we can do it, but what authority are we doing it under, right? And so let me just give you a flavor for some of those authorities. The first and foremost is going to be the Stafford Act, the Robert T. Stafford Disaster Relief Act. And, I come up and talk to the GIFLIC course and some other courses, and I say, if you don't do anything else, as a commander in the Homeland, spend some time to understand the Stafford Act. That is where FEMA gets its authorities, and that's where FEMA gets all of its responsibilities with regard to organizing, not directing. FEMA doesn't direct anything, and they actually don't own a lot of stuff. When you look at the actual size of FEMA full-time employees and FEMA's budget, it's pretty small. They don't own anything. It's a coalition of the willing that they do what they do in a disaster. We talk about unity of effort and unity of command. In the Homeland, it's get along con, right? It is all about relationships, and that's why, Rico, who just left, he talked about, you can't surge rapport. In the Homeland, it is critical, and it's because of the Stafford Act. The Stafford Act is what allows FEMA to mission assign departments and agencies of the federal government to go do stuff as a result of a presidentially declared disaster, or if the president on his own declares a major disaster, which is what happened initially after the shuttle disaster. And it is what limits FEMA to the things that it can and can't do. But it is the pot of money, and it all boils down, unfortunately, to money and who pays. So when a governor says, which is what happened in Katrina, send me everything you got, well, we can't send you everything we got because you can't pay for it all. It's a 75-25 split, right, in terms of how much the state pays and how much the federal government pays. And that's where the DCOs that General Evans talked about, that he's got embedded out in the field, they play that critical role of, okay, well, you say you want, 50 helicopters. Well, but really, what's the mission? What is the requirement? And let us do the analysis so that we're not going to send you 50 helicopters that you can't pay for at the end of the day. So it becomes important, first of all, it's not always the Stafford Act. But you need to understand the Stafford Act because a majority of the responses that happen in the Homeland and the things that the Department of Defense does under its DISCA XORD are going to be Stafford Act responses. And FEMA is ultimately going to have to, will reimburse the department one day for those particular services, which then becomes another authority, immediate response authority, right? Installation commanders have the ability to go off installation, save lives, and do great things. But they got to understand the limits of those authorities, right? We don't want you off post operating for like more than 72 hours without getting it on a mission assignment because of a disaster declaration that might be signed to get that in the right bucket. So, again, it's nice to go off post and it's great to help the community, but you can only do it for a little bit of time, and then you got to come back, or you got to get somebody else to give you some authorities for that. I mentioned the Department of Interior. There's an organization called NIFC, the National Interagency Fire Coordination Center. It's in Boise, Idaho. It's run by the Department of Interior. When DOD sends assets to help fight wildfires, most of those assets are in a Title X status that are supporting the Department of Interior under the Economy Act. The Economy Act is what allows federal to federal support. And it's where a department or an agency will ask for assistance from the Department of Defense because we've got the capability, right? And they'll come in, but then they got to pay back. They have to pay for it, right? So the Economy Act is another authority that you might be acting under. One of my favorite examples is NARA. You say, well, who's NARA? NARA is the National Archives and Records Administration. When President Obama left office, NARA asked and requested of the Department of Defense to move all of the records of the Obama administration to Chicago. And we did that under NARA's authorities, and NARA paid for that. But we used Title X assets to do that mission. We think of the missions to Mexico, where we sent airplane loads of equipment and supplies and relief supplies after a hurricane. That is, after the earthquake. That is the OFDA, the Office of Foreign Disaster Assistance, their authorities, and they pay for that. We talk about the National Guard, right? The National Guard is state active duty, right, where the governor calls up the state, calls the National Guard up and goes and does a law enforcement mission, or as in Texas, they're working along the border, right? A National Guard officer or a service member might be in a Title 32 status, or they might be in a Title 10 status. When we deployed National Guard to Washington, D.C. after January the 6th, in a convoluted way, we had them in state active duty in a Title 32 training status while they're providing security around the Capitol and the National Capital Region. And if we had to activate them to do something, we were going to convert them to state active duty to get around the hoops of having to declare an insurrection so that we could use federal forces. When did we use the Insurrection Act last? 1992, LA riots. We brought in Title X forces into Los Angeles to provide law enforcement support. It was the last time the Insurrection Act was used. The Coast Guard, I mentioned the Coast Guard. Title 14, Title 50, Title 33, Title 19. They have a million hats. You got to understand those authorities. So a long way of saying that when we think about federalism and we think about responding and we think about doing things in the homeland, you can't just say we're the pros from Dover and we're going to just roll in with our stuff, because there's a lot of different authorities out there that are going to either get you in trouble or keep you out of trouble, right? And so when we think about operating in the homeland and we think about relationships and building rapport, the next slide is going to show you what that looks like. This is what whole of government looks like for COVID, right? All those little boxes on the left-hand, at the bottom of it, that's all the state emergency operations centers, right? EMAC in the center, Emergency Management Assistance Compacts. Those are state-to-state agreements in which one state will send to another state a capability out of their National Guard that might impact how we're doing business. I didn't mention HHS's authorities that they have under public health assistance, public health emergency. That was initially declared in 2020 at the start of COVID, before a FEMA disaster declaration was made so that the disaster relief fund could be used. But this is when we talk about, FEMA or DOD being the lead federal agency for Homeland Defense. This is the challenge, because you don't have that command authority to direct anybody to do anything. It is a coalition of the willing. It is get along con. It is understanding who your partners are and what their interests are and why they're doing what they're doing. And you got to understand, as it gets down to it, and just go to the next slide. All disasters are inherently local, and home rule applies. And if you don't understand what that means, if you're going to try to operate in the homeland, you're already behind the eight ball. And that is the local officials, whether that's the chief of the fire department or the chief of police, and they might be goobers, but they're the ones in charge. And you know what? They were there before we got there, and they're going to be there afterwards. And so you have to build those relationships, and that is a critical role that General Evans plays as he goes out. We don't call it battlefield circulation, but he goes out and meets with the governors and meets with the state emergency management directors to because relationships matter more than anything else in the homeland. Political pressure is real life in the homeland. Let me just say that again. Political pressure is real life in the homeland. And we were very fortunate at NORAD and Northcom that we had General Lori Robinson in command. She gave me the latitude to be operational with regard to how we were responding in the 2017 hurricane season while she fought the up-and-out battle. And the up-and-out battle was to Congress. We were on the Hill, she was on the Hill, testifying while we were still trying to do response and save lives. We were getting demands from the Hill and other places for our emails and our records. We were already getting that. So the politics of the day have a play in this, and your job is to not get caught up in that. And General Buchanan's got some great stories about how that happened in Puerto Rico and how inadvertently he ended up in kind of a political mess when he thought he was doing the right thing. Information dominance is key. You have to define success in the homeland before somebody else defines it for you. Everybody is a censor, everybody's on Twitter, and again, another challenge that General Evans has because he can't use the PSYOP tools and the IO tools and all the other things that other land component commanders and other theaters can use. When you're operating in the homeland, that doesn't fly, but you still have to have information dominance because if you lose that cycle, if you lose that information dominance in the homeland of what success looks like, you're behind the eight ball. The National Guard capabilities we talked about. Resource priorities changing daily. And if you're operating in New York, as during Superstorm Sandy or even in the COVID response that we had, the city of New York and the state of New York have different priorities, and they change every day, and you got to be ready to adapt to that. Whole of nation response is the only way you're going to do it, but realize, again, that it is get-along con. And then finally, it's all about synchronizing efforts, and that's where General Evans shines, in synchronizing the efforts of all of our partners on both sides of the border and in every state to actually prepare and defend the homeland so that we can power project and that our critical infrastructures are protected.